Stephen Scheeler, everybody.
Who's that?
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, guys, one last thing of housekeeping is behind me I have a page up there called Slido. So what I want everybody to do is jump on their phones, jump on their iPads, jump on any device they have, and type in slido.com. You're going to go to #Facebook. And what you're going to do is going to ask any questions you have for Stephen the whole way through the fireside. So how it works, it's kind of like a Reddit community. It's going to be upvoted the whole way through. So you're going to jump on slido.com, #Facebook. If you like a question, upvote it. If it's your own question, you can still upvote it, but you can only do that once. And then at the end, in the last 15 minutes, we're going to open it up to essentially a democracy of questions, and whichever ones everybody wants to hear, we're going to shoot them off to Stephen as well. So that's how it's going to run. Nikos, just really quickly as well, if the screensaver comes up, can you just tap on the spacebar for me? Awesome, cool. So that is how we're going to go. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. There's nobody in the front row. I'm very disappointed.
There is one. There is one.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Congratulations.
Stephen has a really, really interesting background, and obviously an eclectic mix of industries you've worked in. I think it's going to be worthwhile for everybody, just anybody who has looked into what you've done and anybody who hasn't. Do you want to just run the story back?
I'll turn myself a bit here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look more at you. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you tonight, and thanks for coming and joining and spending time with us today. So we want to know about my background and where I come from. I'll put it in a nutshell. I'm American. I've been here for almost 30 years.
Yep.
I've done a lot of stuff that led me to kind of more of a tech part of the world, and then I've joined Facebook back in 2011, 2012.
Yep.
And really spent the next 5 years with Facebook just sort of helping grow that business. And
awesome.
Here
Okay.
I am today. That's my CV.
So all the way back to the first couple of businesses you worked in, or the first couple of industries you worked in. Do you want to kind of unpack that a little bit further?
Yeah. It's funny. I get a lot of. I'm very fortunate in that I feel like my career has been a series of luck. Just fortunate events. And so I get MBA students and university students come up to me and they ask me, hey, I want to get to where you are, and what do I do? And I actually don't have a lot of good advice for them, other than, I didn't have some plan to go to where I wanted to go. But what I think I did do right was I was always keen to learn. I've always been a real learner, and I've a bias towards really disrupting myself and making myself uncomfortable and finding new places where, hey, I don't really know anything about this, but I'll figure it out. And I think that's held me in good stead through my whole career. The second thing is I've always really tried to take, well, maybe to a bad extent, I've tried to take the lead in lots of situations. So, I will just I've always tried to naturally be a leader. And if there's energy that needs to be given, I try to give the energy. If there's something that needs to be done that puts you out there, I try to be the one that gets out there. And I found that that's broken me out of my shell. It gets you more noticed. It then gets better opportunities that come your way. So that was always my best advice, was to university students. You don't think you're going to guess how your career is going to go. You've got to bring that energy every single day.
Is that something you were always self-aware of? Like being reflective enough to be like, okay, I want to be comfortable with being uncomfortable? Or is it something that now in reflection, in hindsight, you're like, okay, that was the mentality I kind of approached?
I'll tell you a personal story that may answer that, which was when I was 12 or 14 years old. I was really insecure. I didn't like going to school. I was afraid of my teachers. I didn't have a lot of friends. I just was living in a little kind of unhappy bubble. And I came to a point, and I used to bite my fingernails till they were just bloody. I was such a nervous wreck. And there's probably a lot of reasons for this. Maybe I won't go into those. But one day I just said to myself, I don't want to be this way. I want to break out of this. I want to see the world. I don't want to be kind of cowering. So what I did to push out of that was I was 14. I just turned 14 years old, and I told my parents I was going to go to California. We lived in New York. And I told them I was going to hitchhike to California. Mm-hmm. My parents were very open-minded, and by some miracle, they agreed. They said, no problem.
Yeah.
So I hitchhiked to California.
What was that conversation like?
My mother was very, my dad didn't really care. My dad's a great guy, but he didn't really take a lot of interest in our upbringing. But my mother was just like, it sounds like a great idea. She could see my personality. I needed to break out. And so literally I got my backpack, I got everything together, and I got out on the road. Then I hitchhiked. I left in June. I got to California in about 6 weeks. I then turned around. I hitchhiked all the way back to New York, and it took me about 3 months. And I was on the road.
What was running through your head at that time?
Oh, I was terrified.
Yeah. The first time you hitchhiked, what was that like?
No, it was scary. Like, what am I doing out here? I'd hitchhiked a little bit before, like to school and things, but I'd never been on the open road. But I'd read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which was a big book in those days, and On the Road by Jack Kerouac. And so I had this kind of,
Is that all about hitchhiking?
I want to be this, it's about hitchhiking. I wanted to be this kind of world wanderer. But the bigger point is, what it did is it really helped me break out of my insularity. And so, not that everybody should hitchhike, because I think it's actually very dangerous, but I think find something that really pushes you outside and just takes you to another place. Because I felt like I stretched myself so far, I never snapped back to my previous self. I wound up over here, and then later I did a few other things that took me over there and took me over there. Yeah. So find whatever that works, whatever works for you, and really stretch yourself.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to quickly change the screensaver, just because I know that is going to be annoying a lot of people right now. Sorry about that. So, in terms of practical steps, in terms of putting yourself outside your comfort zone, right? You're asking people to kind of stretch themselves. When you're in that position, whether it's hitchhiking, whether it for somebody else is a different activity, how do you navigate, I guess, one, the uncertainty, but two, the anxiety that comes with that?
Wow, these are tough questions. I thought this would be an easy conversation. I feel like I'm with an analyst or something. How do I navigate those things? I just try to be really a bit blind, to be honest with you. Just kind of plunge in, and sometimes I still feel like life's kind of out of control. Maybe some people in the room have that feeling. We all have a persona that we're trying to project to the world, and we've got all these parts of our life that's, you got your personal life, you got your friends, you got your family, you got your health, you got financials, you got your career. All these plates are spinning. And how many of us go home and you close the door and sometimes you say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I feel like I'm a failure. I think you have to kind of embrace that in a way and admit that I feel like I'm a failure. I don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes it's good to just get it out there. When I first went to Facebook, I actually had that moment where I said to other people in the business, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I really didn't. I was like, in those days on Facebook, there were no job descriptions. We had very few tools to do things. Most jobs were brand new, and so nobody had done it before. So you had to just kind of figure it out. It kind of suited me really well because I was used to saying, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. And at Facebook, literally, nobody knew what they were doing. Yeah. So you were kind of in good company. But I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
absolutely.
my riff on that.
Well, I will make sure I come out of the rabbit hole because I go on a lot of tangents, and I love unpacking kind of your thinking, your philosophy around everything. But I'm sure everybody wants to know a little bit more around the actual journey from Facebook, because I know you worked at Facebook, then you were the MD at Instagram, then you became the MD of Facebook as well for Australia, New Zealand. Yeah. Do you want to comment a little bit around the different roles you had at Facebook?
The Instagram Facebook thing was at the same time. Okay. Essentially, because you kind of head both businesses at the same time in Australia. So kind of my journey through Facebook. So if you remember back to just around 2011, 2012, Facebook listed on the stock market. So Facebook's had its different eras of Facebook. The early era was, the social network, the movie, right? Which was most of those people are, much richer than me, and they're doing other things now. But a few carried on in Facebook. I wasn't there in that era. I came in just after that era when we were sort of professionalizing the business. And my first role at Facebook was essentially head of sales and marketing in Australia. We didn't have an MD at the time. There was no such thing. We didn't have country heads. And so I built out the sales and marketing team. And literally we probably had 5 people in Australia when I joined the business. And today we would have 150 people. So it's not like it's crazy scale, but the business has grown in terms of numbers. It's well over, it's $1 billion US dollar plus business now. It was nothing. We had nothing back in those days. And we started to build out different pieces of the business over time, and my role changed almost every month. In fact, lots of people's roles changed. We kept restructuring, we kept adding new pieces. In Facebook, there's something called cross-functional teams. And when I first started, we had like one cross-functional team. It was policy and communications. By the time I left, we had about maybe 25 cross-functional teams in Australia. We had more in Asia. And the complexity of managing the business was growing almost exponentially. It became quite unwieldy to manage Facebook towards the end. They've added new layers. They're adding new layers of management now to start to deal with that. But it really went from this old startup days. My first days in Facebook were very, I wouldn't say crazy, but it was a little bit like the old, the movie, right? So it was, and when I first joined, Facebook had just fired, kind of cleaning out a few people in Australia who were living on the edge. There was some really bad, crazy behavior.
Okay.
And they'd sort of said,
Are we at liberty to say what that crazy behavior was?
Well, like one guy, and he left, he was exited just before I joined. He got this thing where he wanted to get, he wanted to get a new iPhone from the Mac store. And so they said, well, we need a letter, something about they needed a letter from your boss or something. So he went and he wrote a letter and he signed it Mark Zuckerberg. He actually forged Mark's signature and he gave it to Apple or something.
Yeah. I
think half in jest. He was a bit of a nutter. Well, he got fired for doing that because it was, it was something you shouldn't do. But stuff like that would go on all the time and nobody would get fired. And eventually the business started kind of pulling back because, once you list on the stock exchange, you need to start exhibiting certain behaviors. So we still had fun internally, but, you needed to respect certain boundaries, as all businesses do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into, I guess, the culture of Facebook, right? So a lot of people see from the outside Facebook being, I guess a really good representation of where most startups want to go, right? Facebook, whether it is through the movie, whether it's just general notoriety, people know about Facebook, whether it's in the startup ecosystem or now just generally, right? But you've obviously been behind the curtain on the other side. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's actually like working within Facebook from a cultural perspective and just in general, the people?
I think on one side, it's just like any other business and any other culture, right? It's not, they're just normal people in Facebook.
Yeah.
And so on one side, it's the same. I think on the other side, there is some things that are really unique that feel unique and special.
Yeah.
So one thing is just the mission of Facebook. At that time, it was make the world more open and connected, give people the power to share. It's changed a little bit, but it's essentially the same. And that was a mission that everybody really shared. Like it was just, the culture was so strong about making the world a better place. And there were some old school Facebookers who still were there in this old school. They've been there 3-4 years. These were the veterans. And they really had absorbed the DNA of Facebook and they carried it into the new world. And then, guys like me came in and then I became the old school and then I carried it to the next. So it's almost like a heritage you carry on within Facebook.
The torch kind of concept, yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff in Facebook where people would talk about, hey, that's not Facebook or that's not the way we do things. Now what that was sometimes meant different things to different people, but there's core values of the business that are really strongly held.
What was your experience like coming from a place, correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't have as strong a mission necessarily, or the mission didn't permeate everybody's kind of behaviors?
It was so refreshing. I mean, if you can join a mission-driven business, and there's Facebook's not the only one. And it doesn't have to be startups, big, small, but a business that's really got a mission, that really believes in it, that really drives. I mean, it just adds an energy and a drive. All the vectors are good. Personal vectors, team vectors, organizational vectors.
Was it like everybody was talking about the Facebook mission all the time, or was it everybody was staying late working? Like, in terms of like actual representations of this passion, how did it come out?
So a bit of both. I think it would come out through just sort of differential effort to solve problems and personal responsibility. So there's sayings in Facebook such as, at Facebook, nothing is somebody else's problem. Nothing is somebody else's responsibility. So there was just constant people just going over the fence to fix or help or do.
Yeah.
Another thing in Facebook, which is focus on impact. And so in the early days when I was at Facebook, we didn't have job descriptions that were, nobody even knew what they're you just made your own job. But the key thing was to really focus on where you could have the most impact and then prioritize everything to have that impact. So at Facebook, you remove a lot of the kind of bullshit that other companies have. So for example, at Facebook, there's no compulsion to go to almost any meeting. Yeah, nothing's compulsory. So if there's a team meeting or a company meeting or an all hands, you don't have to go. If you think you've got more important things to do, you don't have to go. It's not held against you.
Yeah.
We almost never have a compulsory meeting. And that's because, hey, you know what you're doing. It's not for me to tell you how you should prioritize.
Yeah.
And I think giving people that kind of autonomy and helping them focus on impact, it helps bring out the best in them.
Yep.
Because then otherwise you demotivate people when you try to control them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's one aspect.
Just quickly on that, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
But was it hard to, I guess, calibrate between the autonomy being very refreshing and very liberating, as you kind of touched on before? It was nice to be in that environment. On the other side, it also potentially could be stressful, right? Because you now have all the responsibility.
Yeah, it was stressful. There was a thing at Facebook where there was this valley of death that people would go through. So we were very lucky. We could get really high quality people, from all parts of the world, and they would come in, and everybody at Facebook would go through this. They go through this euphoria the first few weeks because we'd fly them to California. It'd just be one big good time at our head office. I mean, it was just I can't believe I'm here, and there's Mark, and and wow, and everything's free, and all the food is free, and so you get this. If you've ever seen the movie The Intern, that's a Google movie, but that's kind of what it's like. It's oh my God, there's people riding bikes. It feels
it's like a euphoria, right?
It feels amazing. I remember my first week at Facebook when I went to California, and I was with some other guys who started with me, and we were just like, this is unbelievable. I'm like in Disneyland. It's unbelievable. You go through that period, and then reality starts to set in, which is, wow, I have to figure out what I need to do. And then people go through this period of feeling like they're totally useless. They don't know what they're doing. And they'll wind up in my office, or I didn't have an office, but open plan. They'll wind up talking to me saying, I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm having no impact. Everybody else is a superstar. I'm a nobody. And the advice to all of them is just be patient.
Yeah.
We hired you for a reason. You will get there. And then after about 6 to 9 months, you find that people say, hey, I'm really hitting my straps now. I know what I'm doing.
Is it just them getting used to the environment, getting used to all the independence, getting used to the workload?
The pace as well.
Yes.
It's a very fast-paced business, and things change very rapidly in Facebook. So you just get used to one thing, and then it completely changes. And just keeping track of the pace of the change can be challenging. So at Facebook, I'll give you an example. Internally in Facebook, there was something called HPMs, which was the way we would communicate every week about what we were doing. So everybody in Facebook would write an HPM every week. And H stands for highlights, P is personal, and M is me. P is people, and M is me. Highlights was, here's the highlights of what I'm doing. People was, here's who I want to thank for helping me do it. And me was, here's what I'm doing in my personal life. I'm going skiing on the weekend. I've just had a baby, whatever it is. And so the idea about HPM was it was your ability to tell the world what you're doing. And we would do it in emails in those days. And so everybody on Friday would sit down for half a day and write their HPMs. It was like was it
short? Was it long? Was it people would give essays?
Write super long HPMs. They would have, there's a lot of budding.
People would journal in there and be like, oh, well, it's
there's all these Jack Kerouacs in Facebook writing, and so HPMs would soak up all this time every Friday.
Yeah.
And then of course everybody is emailing them out to everybody, and then you're supposed to take all your team's HPMs and put them together, and then make a group HPM and then send that up.
Okay.
And so we were eventually everybody was like, man, you could spend your whole time at Facebook just reading everybody's HPMs.
Ironically, it's like a news feed, right?
Yeah, and Mark would have an HPM, and Cheryl would have an HPM, and so you'd be reading everybody's, I want to read Mark's HPM.
Was everybody hanging out for what Mark's HPM would be?
Oh yeah, and Mark's HPM would be really long, and so you eventually, as a business, we said we need to stop this, and we need to get more sane, because knowing what everybody else is working on, transparency is a huge thing in Facebook, which is everybody shares everything, but oversharing and spending all that time knowing what's going on can just absorb all of your time. So we had to find a balance between the two. So we eventually we changed the methods by which we shared that kind of information.
Awesome. And you touched on this idea of, I guess, quick iteration and everything always changing. Within Facebook, it being very transient as well, right? Like on one hand, you'd be doing this, and then your North Star would change very quickly. How was it like adapting to that? Was it like just straight in? You were like, okay, this is part of the Facebook culture? Or did it take a little bit of getting used to?
At first, it was a little. If you come from businesses that are just they have a business plan, they have products, and that's what they do, it was frustrating. But over time, you just got used to that. We are growing and changing. We're changing ourselves, we're changing the world in some ways, and you just get used to that pace of change. The way the friction came often wasn't internally; it was with external parties who were used to a way of doing something or had expectations, and then we would change, and then you would get people were pissed off. And I'll give you an example, which leads to a funny story. I had a client. So these were the early days, and in those days, Facebook makes its money by selling ads. So I helped build the sales and marketing business, and then ran the whole business. And in those times, we had very small sales teams, and so I would go see some of the biggest advertisers myself. As time went on, I didn't do that as much, but one of our biggest was Domino's Pizza. I'm happy to call them out. They're an awesome business. Don Mage their CEO, is a really amazing guy. Go see Don speak or follow him on Facebook. He's awesome. And they had been a big spender on Facebook. In those days, they were pretty big investor, pretty big advertiser with us. And then they stopped. And I was like, why did these guys go from really big to small? Yeah. And we found out the reason was they were using a product that we had. It was a deal ad unit to get it, and we discontinued it. We deprecated it because, for various reasons, we used to deprecate products all the time. And they got pissed off. They were like, we built a whole business around this, and then you got rid of it. Yeah. And so we were pissed off. So I flew up to see them. I had a meeting with the head of marketing and stuff, and they were so frosty. They were yelling. They were like, pissed off. I said, hey, let's go out to dinner. They said, we don't go out to dinner unless there's something to celebrate. So we're not going anywhere with you. Yeah. So I was like, whoa. So we left, and Google was all over them, and they were loving up Google, and we compete with Google. So I was like, I got to get back at these guys. I got to draw these guys back in. So about a month later or so, we got invited to their annual conference where all the pizza franchisees come. And it was at...
Sounds like Microsoft sort of conference.
It was awesome. And it was Jupiter's Casino. It would really be your style, man. So I went and I camped out up there for 2 days. And I would never normally do this, but I was really determined. It was like my white whale, right? And I wanted to meet Don Mage, the CEO I had met before, and I wanted to kind of get back into the good graces. And we had really good products for them now. So I went there. I spent 2 days. I kind of stalked Don and got him coming out of the lift and stuff. And finally, the last night, and Google was hanging around there too. And I could see they were all lovey-dovey with Google, pissing me off. So last night, big gala dinner, everybody in black tie. It was a charity. They have a big charity auction that night. Thousands of pizza franchisees, awesome people. And they start auctioning stuff off, and there was people would donate, and you would auction it, and the money goes.
Is it like a silent auction sort of thing?
It was a guy up on stage, the MC, auctioning events and dinner with a famous person or whatever. Yeah. And it all goes to a Domino's charity that they are they're very passionate about. And so up on the screen went spend a day at Google at their head office in Sydney. And it was like, you can become an intern for a day, and we'll take you on Google. You'll meet all these Google people. Yeah. And that bidding started going, and all these people were bidding on it. And I leaned over to the guy who had told me he didn't want to have dinner with me. And I said, hey, I didn't know Facebook would contribute something. I had no idea this was going. He said, you can contribute something now. And the bidding was going on. It went for $4,000, this Google experience. I said, I'll top that. I was a little drunk at the time. And I said, forget about flying to Sydney. We'll fly 2 people, business class, to California. We'll take them to Facebook's head office, get a full tour, and a meeting with Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg.
Love it.
And he was like, why, really? I said, yeah, go tell him. So up to the stage he goes. He tells the announcer. The MC goes nuts. He goes, wow, we just got this thing with Facebook. You can meet Mark Zuckerberg. And
is it at any point running through your head, you're like, oh, crap, now I actually have to get Zuck in a room, right?
At that point, it didn't. This comes back to my kind of I just plunge in. Later, it did. The bidding was going $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. It went for $40,000.
Wow.
The biggest thing they'd ever auctioned at this auction, by far. Blew Google out of the water. Right? The CEO and the board of directors were on another table. They all leapt up. They were tears in their eyes. They were all, he ran over to hug us. We had all these photos and handshakes, and I still have all the pictures. And I walked away, and I was with one of my guys from Facebook, and he was just like, "What have you just done? This is not going to happen." I was like, okay, I got to start to figure this out. But I found a way to get over the Google hump. So I went away, called my boss. He was like, that wasn't a good idea, but he didn't chew me out. A few days go by, I was back in Sydney, and he called me, my boss called me, and he said, this is bad. He said, everybody at head office knows about this. It's the talk of the campus. Mark knows, Cheryl knows, and they are not happy. They're pissed off. I was just like, fuck, I'm going to be fired just like that other guy got fired. And so I went back to my desk, and I flipped open, and I wrote an email to Mark. Mark used to send out his HBM stuff, so I had his email address, Mark, zuck@fb.com.
I think you just told me.
Yeah, you can email Mark. And so I emailed Mark, and I explained what I did. I didn't like to lose against Google. I wanted to, get back the best clients, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. And so I sent it off to him, and then a day or so went by. I went back to my desk. I didn't look on my phone for some reason. I flipped open my computer, my laptop. There was a reply from Mark. And so I clicked on it, opened it up, and it just said one line. It was like, "I love what you did, no problem."
Really?
And so
that's awesome.
I was like, I called my boss. I'm like, it seems that Mark isn't as pissed off as you thought he was. And he was just like, I can't believe this. They're like, how did you get
it was
this?
Planned. I knew that.
How did you get Mark to do that? I said, Mark's cool.
Yeah.
So I arranged it. I wound up in California. I saw Zuck, and we kind of caught up. It was a big joke between us. And it became a bit of a little legend within Facebook. I was the guy that auctioned off Zuck. And about a month or two later, I was over there. The guy who bid on it he brought his whole family. We all had, it was supposed to be 5 minutes with Mark. It turned into 45 minutes. Cheryl joined us for the whole time. I've never seen happier or more starstruck people, including me, because that kind of time with Mark is unheard of. And so to this day, Mark and I have a slight connection. I'm the guy that auctioned him off, so I'll always have that unique.
At like big team meetings, you're like, Mark, do you remember me?
Yeah, he might be forgetting it now. It was a few years ago. I'm sure there's other crazy things that have happened. But I think if you did that today, you would be fired. I think I got in at the last minute. So.
I think the relationship with Mark would be really interesting to talk about. What sort of FaceTime do people who work at Facebook, potentially yourself as well, get with Mark, and whether it was that time, whether it was other times, what's it like?
Yeah, what's the FaceTime like?
Yeah.
So I'll say two things about Mark that are, I'll say one kind of, the first thing you notice about Mark is he's very sweaty, all dewy. I said that to him when I met him. I'm like, man, you are sweaty, man. His hands are sweaty, and he's just a sweaty guy. But the second thing you notice about Mark is he's always looking, he's politely, but he's looking past you. And I think that's kind of summarized him in life. He's always looking past the thing that's immediately in front of him to the next thing and the next thing. And so you're talking to him, and you can tell he's listening to you in one sense, but on the other side, he's not really listening to you. Or he's hearing what you'll say, and then he'll jump. He doesn't need to hear everything. He's like, I got it. And he'll jump 10 steps ahead of you. So his brain just moves faster than most of us. He is at a genius. And I don't know him well. People who know him well, who are very smart, say there's no question Mark is at a genius level. One thing that I think he's gotten a lot better at is personal relationships. He's super approachable and very warm, and he's a really authentic guy. And I got to say, I mean, Mark gets bad press in some respects because of his profile. And this doesn't necessarily mean everything he does is good, but he has very, very good intentions for Facebook, for changing the world, and he is really serious about not harming or doing bad things. And Mark doesn't dismiss things out of hand. He wants to leave a legacy where he's changed the world for the better, and so that's what really occupies him all the time. He doesn't really care about small things like, he's the CEO. He has to care about how much money we make, but he's not obsessed by financial results.
It's all his vision. It's all.
He never talks about financials internally to the business, ever. I've never heard Mark talk about a dollar number.
Yeah. What sort of stuff would he be sending out? Like not only in his weekly email, but like what sort of vision would he be communicating all the time?
So clearly, and he does this publicly as well, but Mark's always setting what's the next thing, where's the next place we're going, what's our 10-year roadmap, what matters, what doesn't matter, what should we be focusing on, what shouldn't we be focusing on. He shares, there's a big tradition in Facebook to share everything. I meant referred to HPMs. Well, Mark, another thing we do is something called Q&As, and Mark does a Q&A every Friday. The entire company is invited. It's all live streamed. It's posted. If you're in California, you can go and sit in the front row. I always encourage people to sit in the front row. I always sit in the front row when Mark talks. People would pay a lot of money to sit in that row. Yeah. At Facebook, you can do it every Friday, and Mark will answer any question that people have. He starts by just telling you what he's doing. He'll talk about what he's working on, and he'll tell you about stuff that's really, most companies wouldn't talk about publicly or internally. Facebook is surrounded by journalists and bloggers and investigators. I mean, literally, they're in the bushes outside the office. Like, you will get journalists outside hiding in the bushes.
Walking between meetings, you're like, oh, no, don't worry, like, it's just him, right?
Well, if you're on the campus, it's very controlled. Yeah. It doesn't look controlled, but it is. You can't get on the campus without an escort. But that said, Mark shares so much internally that most companies wouldn't. And the philosophy is, I'm going to share with you stuff that's sensitive, that's internal, but I think it's important that we share this stuff and that we know about it, because building up walls makes teams less effective, makes the business move more slowly. But the quid pro quo is that if something does leak, that person will be let go from Facebook. Right? And Mark occasionally has to get up, and he doesn't make a big thing about it, but he will say, hey, I've had a really good week this week, but there was one bad thing that happened. He'll say, we've been working on this, and this has been happening, and we're just about to announce this new thing, and the whole world's waiting for it. But the bad news is it was leaked to the press. And so we found that person, and that person no longer is at Facebook. Yeah. And so then he'll just move on. He'll just say, look, I'm disappointed, but we're going to continue with the culture of openness. Yeah. So that's.
Does that freak everybody out when he's like, but one bad thing, and everybody's just like holding their breath? Is that
usually when this is a bad thing, it's because somebody leaks something. Yeah. But I wouldn't say people hold their breath, but you kind of look around and go, well, that's the deal. That we're here. You're privileged to this information, and you're, that's the privilege, but what's privileges come responsibilities, and that's just Mark's deal. I'll tell you everything, but you don't tell anyone outside the business. Seems like a good deal to me.
I think it's fair enough, right? Yeah. What I think will be interesting is to talk about not just Facebook, but the best and worst things about working specifically in, I guess, the startup stream. Because I don't want to just pigeonhole Facebook and you to say like potentially a bad experience at Facebook or anything, but the transition from working in, I guess, a startup-centric environment, what was the best and worst thing about that?
So you mean from the old Facebook to the new Facebook? Or
more like corporations to startup industry?
So my career, and as somebody here I used to work with 20 years ago, hi Maggie. So I was a management consultant at one time. I then worked in corporate, with kind of, sort of typical biggish corporate jobs, and then I did some startups along the way. So I'd already had startup experience. I assume who in here has startup experience in some way, shape, or form, right? Almost everybody. That's why you're here. That is so useful and so valuable because you have to do everything yourself, essentially, right? How many of you are doing things you never thought you would be doing, and you never dreamt you'd be doing? Everything from legal stuff to accounting stuff to development stuff to employment stuff and for all that admin stuff that keeps the business going, that sucks up so much of your time. And you're everything. You're the head of sales, you're the head of marketing, you're the head of operations, you're head of everything. That is such valuable experience because so many people who live in corporate land, they lose those muscles over time. They lose the ability to do their own stuff, to do their own PowerPoint presentations. I've known people who've spent too long having people do that for them. And then at Facebook, nobody does your PowerPoint presentation. You do them yourself. Yep. And I had nobody who did mine. even as MD, I'd have to do them myself. So guess what? I did almost no PowerPoint presentations. I found a way not to do them. I was very good at PowerPoint. I used to be the king of PowerPoint, and then over time I was like, this is a waste of time. But all those skills you're learning, they are really valuable because the future is going to be much more lean, even in corporate land, and having the ability to be autonomous, flexible. Hey, I can do that. I know how that, I've done that before, I think is just so valuable. It's one of the reasons I think I got hired by Facebook, because I had done startup-y stuff.
Yes.
And the truth is, I had 16 interviews before I got hired at Facebook.
Wow.
Which was not unusual in those days. It was probably a little more than most people. But the reason was, I kept going back, meeting more people, and they were worried about me because one, they thought I was, they didn't say this, but they thought I was too old. Uh-huh. Average age in Facebook is 26. At that time, I was about 46.
Yep.
And I was one of the oldest people in all of Facebook. I think I told you before, I was one of the 10 oldest people in Facebook. So this was like, this guy's too old.
Do you want to tell everybody about the nickname?
Yeah, I'll tell you in a sec. And the second thing they were worried about was I've been in corporates too long. I had an MBA. I was, they're like, all right. He's not going to be able to do things. And we did hire people and bring them in that had been used to kind of infrastructure around them, and they would struggle at Facebook because there was no infrastructure. You had to do it yourself. So I think you're learning really valuable skills if you're doing whatever you're doing entrepreneurially. My nickname at Facebook was OMS. My team gave it to me early on. It stood for Old Man Scheeler. And so I became OMS.
Awesome. So in terms of, I guess, like practical applications from the startup world to the corporate world. So some people here are still working corporate. Some people are starting their own startup. What do you think is actionable advice for corporations to take on board to apply what you were talking about just before, like learn to be more autonomous, learn to do your own things, learn to be, I guess, a generalist in a lot of ways. Like that advice gets thrown out a lot, but I think potentially there's a disconnect there in terms of how somebody actually does it.
I think there's two. I mean, I'm not an organizational design or job design expert. I think you're. Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay.
They're the questions.
I'm not an expert. But these are the two observations I make. One is remove as much of the bullshit around people as you can. Bullshit is a deterrent to entrepreneurs, right? Like unnecessary bureaucracy or bullshit, get it out. The second thing is find paths for people that they can travel as entrepreneurs within your business.
Okay.
I'll give you an example of how Facebook tries to do that second one. There's two types of people in Facebook. One is people who we have expectations are going to manage other people in the course of their career. The others are people who are never going to manage people in the course of their career. And the ones who will never manage people we call individual contributors.
How does somebody identify whether they're in one camp or the other?
It kind of reveals itself over time. Now there's not a lot, they're called ICs in Facebook, so an IC. Some people can spend their whole career at Facebook as an IC. So there's a guy, a very senior guy at Facebook named Matt Jacobson. Matt was the first head of marketing at Facebook. He's one of the original 30 employees in the business. He's one of Mark's best friends. Matt's still there. And Matt's been an IC the whole time. He's never had anybody report to him. And Matt just knows he's not a people manager. He doesn't want to be a people manager. So for corporates, often the path to the top is you need to manage people. You have to have a span of control. You have to have teams. That's a skill that's important, but it's not a skill that everybody has. And you would still need those people who are good, who don't want to manage people. Yeah. I see so many managers who don't like being managers, but they still want to work in that business. They still have something to offer. So I talk to corporates about this. I say, well, do you have an IC path? Could as an individual contributor, could I spend 15 years at your company and rise up and get paid the same as a manager? Yeah. Like, oh no, that's not possible. You have to manage people. That will kill. That exits a lot of people that you want to keep around.
Yeah. What level of resistance you get from, because right now, if anybody who doesn't know, Stephen works with PwC now, doing a lot of advisory in terms of the trends in terms of digital marketing, the intersection between startups, tech, and the applications to the corporate world. What sort of resistance have you found? If any?
Yeah, it's probably not so much resistance to digital transformations, like, obviously a buzzword. I try not to use it. There is a lot. I'll give you a blanket sort of observation. So I've been in Australia a long time. I'm Australian now. We've been isolated for a long time in this country, and that's been a good thing and a bad thing. And the isolation is because of geography. We're a long way from anywhere. It's because of a small population. It's exemplified by Amazon took a long time to get here. Now they're finally coming. But that isolation has led to a little bit of laziness and complacency with a lot of businesses here. Consumers are not lazy in Australia. They're very quick adopters of technology. This is one of the most Facebookized countries in the world, most Appleized countries, most Googleized countries in the world. Consumers are very quick to adopt technology. But the digital journey of corporates has been a lot slower.
Yes.
That is now starting to change. Luckily, the heat is being turned up. But if I go to some of the top businesses in Australia, and I could say the same for some SMEs as well, you just find leaders that are totally out of touch with what's going on and what needs to be done. I'll give you an example. I was with the CEO. I was with a billionaire who owns one of the biggest TV networks in Australia. This was a couple months ago. I knew his son, and his son called me and said, "Hey, my father wants to meet you." So I said, "Great, let's catch up." So we sat down. We had lunch. It was a very long lunch. I was happy to share a lot of Facebook stuff with him. And of course, we'd made his life really hard, right? Facebook, Google, Netflix, we're kind of ruining his billionaire.
Yeah, the foundation.
He's going to have to sell his yacht, right? Or something. So they're a little pissed off. But he admitted to me he had never looked at Facebook on a mobile phone. And it just sort of blew my mind. I'm like, you are complaining about Facebook, Google, Netflix. 16 million Australians every day, pick up their phone and open up Facebook to have a look, and yet you couldn't be bothered, to have your secretary go and load it onto your phone and or just grab a phone and have a look. It just kind of blew my mind. He's like, "Oh, I've never seen Facebook on a mobile phone." I was like, "Oh, really?" And so to me, I was frank with him. I was like, you have to blame yourself a lot for where you're at. It's not that hard to look at Facebook on a mobile phone, and I know wasn't going to change your world if you did, but you're not making the effort, And so there's a lot of leaders, not just in Australia, but around the world, they're used to a formula of success, and they're just used to applying it. Those formulas are breaking down now. So look at if you're a media mogul, look at Facebook on a mobile phone for once.
Where do you think that disconnect comes from? Where do you because from a lot of people here, they would think social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, anything like that, is reasonably ubiquitous now. Where do you think the people at the very, very top, why do you think they're not really aware of that to the same level?
I think, if I had to define it one simple way, it's old white males. I mean, I'm one of them, right? But old white males live in a certain bubble. They're well paid generally, and so they live in a bubble. Yeah. And they have people do things for them, and they have no idea how people really live their lives. And technology has really changed how generations live their lives. I think you go back 30, 40, 50 years, a 15-year-old and a 55-year-old, their worlds probably weren't that different, but now they're very different. And so they're just losing touch with how, not even super young people, but anybody younger than them actually lives their life. And maybe that was irrelevant at one time, but now it's very relevant because it's impacting consumer experience and expectations and all that sort of stuff. So my answer is old white men. So,
no, that's very succinct, right? Awesome. We'll flick it over to audience questions. So, Stephen, if you just want to look up there at the very top, we have what is the single most important aspect of a marketing strategy? So, a little bit more of a practical, actionable takeaway, I think.
Use more Facebook. That's got to be the single most important aspect of a marketing strategy. If I had to have one word, data. Right? Deep insights on data. Deep insights on customers. If you don't have a data-driven marketing strategy, whatever it is, you don't have a marketing strategy. I mean, and the data exists, and if it doesn't, it's not in your hands. You got to go and get it because your competitors do. So data. For
non-technical founders or people who are working in startups who aren't technical, would you recommend them one, either learn data literacy a little bit more, or potentially outsource that if they're a founder, right? Like, which one do you think is more effective?
I think there's a level of data literacy you need to have to know how the machine gets driven.
Yep.
You can determine how far you need to go yourself. It's not that hard, but ultimately you're going to hire people that are smarter than you, or outsource it to people that are smarter than you to figure it out. But you need to have basic understanding in order to know not to avoid the smoke and mirrors. Hey, I have a solution for you, but it's not really the solution.
Cool.
Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so number 2, how can we make risk-averse corporations and business leaders create a culture of innovation and experimentation within their workplaces?
How can we make them? Force them. Man, that's such a tough question, and so many people are working on it. I'll tell you what I'm doing to try to solve that problem. So I've spent a lot of time with boards and with CEOs and with the old white men, and telling them, and not bludgeoning them with statistics, but basically telling them stories about how their business is under threat. So to unpack the threats they're facing. Now, it's one thing to realize that threat. The next thing is, well, what do I do about it? And then the third thing is actually doing it. And that question is more about actually doing it. So the first is they have to realize the threat's like being an alcoholic, right? You have to accept you're an alcoholic, and then you have to seek treatments, and then you have to...
Step 1, awareness.
Yeah, and then you have to action the treatment, right? So these guys, many of them are still at the am I an alcoholic stage.
How quickly do they get to the stage where they're like, okay?
Well, I think luckily Amazon's arrival has been a really good thing for just sending a shockwave. And it's not just retailers, it's the whole market, right? It's on the front page of the AFR every day. And that is a very good thing. The reality is, the tech giants have been here a long time. Facebook's been changing changing the economy. Google's been doing the same. It's just that Amazon's now, we kind of hit this peak Amazon, and it's not peak, but Amazon's become this kind of amazing juggernaut over the past 3 years or so, and now the juggernaut's coming here. So Amazon's arrival has been really good for stimulating conversations. Every boardroom in Australia is talking about Amazon, but the old white men, don't they sell books? I thought they were a book thing, and then you say, they've got 2,000 people working on artificial intelligence, and voice. And
they're like, can you still see it on your phone? And they haven't seen it on their phone.
Yeah, I was with the board of one of Australia's biggest retailers a couple months ago, and I kind of was giving them my perspective on stuff. And I wasn't there to tell them about how Amazon was going to change their world. There's other people telling them that. I just said, let me give you the Facebook perspective on stuff. But one of the things I talked about, I asked them, I said, how many people do you have working on artificial intelligence and voice? And they had no one, 0. This is a household brand. Everybody would, I won't name them, but everybody would shop with them. And my wife works at Amazon. I've got friends at Amazon. They have over 2,000 people working on just Alexa, voice, the AI that drives Alexa, 2,000. That doesn't count the AI that drives everything else in the marketplace. And these guys had no one. And to me, it's just, you are so... There was a starter's gun that went off a few years ago, and you did not hear it. You thought you were running a retail business, and you didn't realize your competitor, who's coming, is running an IT, a tech, a data business, and you had no idea. So it's chilling, but that's where we're at.
Do you think it's too late for them to win that race? It's like potentially winning the race might be a little bit of a fast stretch.
I, to be honest with you, I think a lot of retailers will just be managing a decline in Australia in the next few years. Okay. Not all of them, but I think many will not be able to make the transition. They're too far behind, and their strategies will be kind of holding back the fort, but they just do not have. And the next thing that's going to kill it is going to be voice. It's going to be VR, where that will start to break down the barriers about. E-commerce has a natural ceiling when you're typing on a phone, but once you get to voice and you get to virtual reality, that starts to lift that ceiling. So Amazon doesn't want to be 10 or 15% of market share of retail sales. They want to be 100%.
Yeah.
And you're never going to do that. No matter how good your website is, you're never going to do that for a mobile phone or through a desktop. It's got to go virtual. It's got to go voice. That's why they're putting billions of dollars into it. Yeah. And that, if I'm a retailer, in 10 years, I'm going to be run over by the AI voice train and the VR train are going to run me over.
Yeah. So you think a lot of corporations are potentially right now in a reactive state, right? Like essentially defense mode, like cut your losses kind of thing, and then they won't be able to plug all the holes.
They're all trying to figure it out. And they got a lot of good people, and they've been really successful businesses. Australia has really, in retail, really globally successful businesses. But they've just been hit with this new reality, and that they're they're good people. They're going to figure out the strategy that they need to defend, but they're just so underinvested in certain areas. They just won't be. A big retailer can't go out and hire 2,000 people to work on voice AI engineers because they don't exist here. They're not even here, and they wouldn't want to work for you anyway.
Yeah.
So you've got this real problem. So I'm a little cheery about that one, but I'm trying to help them as much as I can to kind of get as far as.
And that's largely what you do now. You consult corporations and you kind of get them up to speed with where the market's at, right?
I mean, one of the things I've said to the big retailers is, I think you're solving a lot of the right problems. They've all got the same strategy for defending against Amazon, which is lower some prices, get my service better, spend some money on my websites, you get my mobile experience better, click and collect, that's a big thing. Click and collect, we're gonna do that. And then hope that artificial intelligence, virtual reality aren't important. I'm being facetious, but that's essentially their strategy. But I've said to them, I think you're missing something. For example, they don't organize their physical data in a way that's searchable digitally, right?
Of course.
If I want to buy a new pair of Asics runners, this exact model and this exact 10.5 size, literally while we're sitting here now, I can buy that on Amazon or other websites. I can have it in my house in the US within 2 hours. It'll be there by the time I get home. I could do it while I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
Right? I can just take a picture of it. I can just put my camera on it and bang, it's on my way to my house. If I want to go and buy the same shoes right now amongst, maybe there's 30 locations here in the CBD of Melbourne where it's actually on the shelf, pick up my phone, how do I even know they're there, right? You can't find them. Now that's just product level. But think about the things that are in people's heads. One of the differentiators of physical retail is service. Service comes from human beings' brains. So if I want to reseed my garden, put a new lawn in, I might say, hey, is there an expert on buffalo grass in my local Bunnings right now? Well, if I talk to Bunnings, they'll say, hey, yeah, we have lots of people who are experts on buffalo grass. I'll say, great. How can I find them on my phone? How can I book something right now? They'll say, oh, well, you can't do that. I said, that's what you should be organizing.
Yes.
Organize the data that Amazon doesn't have, and that's data you have.
Yes.
So they rush back to their strategies and go, we hadn't thought about that. Let's do that. So I think there are things that they can do to kind of differentiate and then reshape their business in the next few years.
No, that's super insightful. Okay, cool. One last question. In your view, what factors impact on the success or failure of a platform as a service?
People gotta want to use it.
Nice, it's succinct.
There you go.
And,
if nobody wants to use it, it's not going anywhere.
No, that makes total sense, right? At the end of the day, if a product has no users, is a product at all? It's the variation of a tree falling in the woods, right?
Exactly. So it's a simple answer to that question.
Cool.
Great.
Everybody back on their feet, and we're going to say thank you to Stephen. So one big round of applause for Stephen, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.